My name is Wayne McCabe. I'm president of the County Historical Society, and on behalf of our Board of Trustees, I want to welcome you this evening to the presentation that you're going to have regarding George Roy. This evening, Wendy Wyman and Jeffrey Eisen, both members of our trustee board, are going to make the presentation to you about the life and times of and the works of George Roy. You see before you a lot of artifacts that they will be talking about and discussing, both his life, his work as a painter, illustrator, working with textiles and also hardware. So I was told to keep this under 20 minutes, so I can do that. So with that, I would like to introduce first Jeffrey Eisen, who will open up and they will alternate and the presentations. Yes, it's all yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody.
Good
We'll
evening.
explain a little bit about the format and how it's going to work tonight. Wendy and I are each giving 2 presentations. We're going to alternate. Between each of our presentations, it will require a scene change. So there'll be a couple dead minutes there while we're changing the scene. In terms of changing the scene, I'd like to thank Hank Ickes, a longtime volunteer, who's going to help us as our designated stage crew. And I'd also like to thank our gone friend, Myra Snook. Myra was the one who introduced me to George Roy. And my favorite thing that I remember her saying about him when I asked her, well, where is all his stuff? She says, his stuff is everywhere in the museum. So if you would hold your questions until the end of all 4 presentations, that'll just make it a little bit easier. So was he a Renaissance man? Let's find out. George Watson Roy was born November 17th, 1858 in Frieden. His parents were Charles Roy and Elizabeth Hankinson. He had 3 brothers, William, Joseph, and Simeon. Throughout his life, he extensively researched his family genealogy. He left us an 800-page volume just on the Roy lineage alone. He discovered that he was a son of the American Revolution by 4 family lines: Roy, Hazen, Hankinson, and Rhodes. He once claimed he was a 3rd cousin to himself, as his 2 great-grandfathers were twin brothers. I will leave it for the genealogist to verify whether that's, I mean, I remember Willie Nelson's song, my own grandpa. So this is the book that he left us on the Roys. 800 pages. It's unfortunately not in very good condition, but you can see the spine. Roy Family by George W. Roy, Frieden, New Jersey. Pages and pages and pages of different generations that he had researched. And you can imagine the task that was before computers, before Ancestry.com and all those other things. And it's all handwritten, of course, too. He grew up on the family farm in Frieden and attended the Frieden District School. Later in his life, he drew a picture, made a drawing of the Frieden School. I'll be passing this around later on when I show you other drawings, but I just wanted to show you one of these because on the back he talks about the things that he did in school. It is here I got my district schooling and high, college, and university, and my theological training, all in this building. It had a chapel above for church services, Sabbath school, Bible class, and prayer meetings. The school below here, we played baseball, long ball, round town, coal middle, house ball, catch ball, duck on the rock, sow ball, Anthony over, tag, strip the willow, crack the whip, leapfrog, whoop-a-dee, drop handkerchief, chase the squirrel, move bags on the mill, hide and seek, horse, tater-totter, jump rope. They had a few games that they played, didn't they? And then he goes on. The books, as first I remember, were the Sanderson series, later the National. We had copybooks, writing, spelling, reading, arithmetic, geography, astronomy, and algebra. I never indulged in those. A stove in the center of the room, a stage across the north part of the school, and big blackboards, a clock, a small library, and globe. And as I remember when first at school, they had the numeral frame, a small frame of wires with colored balls that you could shove to learn to count with. I now have a strip of the old frame. After it got broke, I always kept it to use for a roller. And what he's talking about, which you'll see when I pass it around, is an abacus. In the 1880s, he was in his 20s and a busy man. He studies painting and drawing. He creates quilts, banners, and other textile works. He keeps diaries, mostly handwritten entries interspersed with newspaper clippings from Sussex County newspapers. He left the Historical Society 28 years of diaries. In that cabinet, there are 28 of those. We'll be looking at that again in a minute. At the same time, we find he has an interest in growing exotic plants, especially cacti and succulents. We have many copies of correspondence that he received from nurserymen throughout the Northeast United States when he was writing about different plants that he was interested in acquiring. Didn't throw anything away. This is when he started to become an artist who specialized in flowers. And one of the first flower drawings that we have of his is this small one called Pearl des Jardins, which in French means pearl of the garden. It was a white rose. This is from the early 1880s. He also was so proud of this plant that he had a photograph made of it by a famous photographer in downtown Newton, A.C. Townley. This is a night blooming cereus, and I also should mention, George never left any blank piece of paper. He had to write everywhere. So what he wrote on the back of this, night blooming cereus, owned by George W. Roy, Frieden, Sussex County, New Jersey. It had 8 buds on this year, 5 of which flowered. One came out Monday evening, July 29th at Mrs. Emmaus, where I had it. The second came out Wednesday, July 31st, of which this is a picture that I had taken. I had many sizes taken. This is the smallest one. I took it to Newton and had it exhibited at the store of Valentine and Wilson on Spring Street, and had it photographed in Townley's gallery. These 2 flowers, put this back up here. These 2 flowers were 18 inches in diameter, of a creamy white color. The buds were first noticed June 1st. The flowers are very fragrant if kept indoors. The buds grow very slow until a few days before opening. The last day they grow very fast, begin to swell out in the morning, and continue to open about 6 o'clock, fully expanded by 9 o'clock. The third one came out Wednesday evening, August 28th, a month later than the first two, at my Aunt Sarah Wintermute in Newton. It was not so large, but a fine flower. Presented to William Roy, Frieden, New Jersey, September 1889. In other words, he presented this to his brother, William. By coincidence, George Parachuk recently gave me a list of articles about Mr. and Mrs. Tully. Across the street is the Tully House, which is now owned by the Historical Society in the process of being renovated and restored. So these articles that George found in the New Jersey Herald. On that list was an example of another night blooming cereus in Newton the following year. From the New Jersey Herald, July 24th, 1890. A night blooming cereus, I have to laugh because there's a punchline coming up. A night blooming cereus owned by Mrs. M.P. Tully and faithfully cared by her for 7 years, blossomed for the first time on Friday evening last, while she was at Asbury Park. The plant was placed on the porch of Dr. Newman's residence, which is the Academy building that we know today. It still has that same porch. And the newspaper says the flowers were admired by all the passers-by. So wouldn't that be something to see a century plant, a night blooming cereus on the porch of the Academy. Another example of Roy's passion for plants comes from Nathan Lanning in his History of the Yellow Frame Church on the occasion of the dedication of the second new church in 1887. The church was tastefully decorated with odd and rare plants furnished by Mrs. J.B. Hunt, Mrs. David Rowe, and George Roy. Mrs. Rowe contributed some nice coleus and fuchsias, while Mr. Roy brought nearly a wagon load of plants. Among them being 5 varieties of cactus, a century plant which was 12 years old, 7 varieties of variegated leaf geraniums, 6 of begonias, and more than a dozen other kinds of choice flowers. There was a century plant on either side of the pulpit, one of them belonging to Mrs. Hunt and the other to Mr. Roy. He was a religious man, and as noted above, was actively involved in the Yellow Frame Church, which was his family's church. In 1888, he formally joined the Yellow Frame Church, and from 1891 to 1893, when he left for Lincoln, Nebraska, he was a trustee of the church. He joined the Young People's Society of Christian Endeavor, also known as CE. It was a youth movement. They had many different tenets. The ones that I've come across most frequently are no drinking, no smoking, no dancing. I will note that a couple times when George is talking about these tenets, he is very specific in saying no whiskey drinking. So I wonder if maybe he was a beer drinker or a wine drinker, who knows? Some of the things that he did for Yellow Frame Church, he had that man that we've talked about before, A.C. Townley, photographed both churches. These were done about 1900. This is the original church, which was built in 1786, and it was torn down in 1905. This is the current church. Of course, the current church has a very large addition on the right side, but it was built in 1887. He often would have photographs made by Townley and used them for different purposes. This is one example. He made these for use of the Yellow Frame Church. Another thing that he did about Yellow Frame Church, he wrote, how many pages? Over 500 pages on the history of Yellow Frame Church. These are copies. Dick Stevens has been indexing the names in these for the last 5 or 6 years. He tells me he's almost done, right, Dick?
Yeah.
Give you an idea of, there's the photograph that we talked about. All handwritten, of course, all kinds of statistics, drawings, etc. These are inscriptions in the Yellow Frame Church Cemetery on the gravestones. He has pages and pages of those. If anyone is interested in Yellow Frame Church and its cemetery, you'll be able to read all the inscriptions here. Grace Van Horn, another Yellow Frame Church historian, gives us a description of George's Yellow Frame history manuscript. His story of building the church includes copies of deeds, agreements, plans, specifications, list of contributors, and correspondence. He names people who helped and sometimes those who did not help. He praises and criticizes. He was certainly not the only voice to praise or criticize, but he wrote his ideas down so that we have them today. As I mentioned before, in 1888, he became a member of the Yellow Frame Church, and in 1891, he became a trustee. This is his Bible from 1891. And you can see it's very heavily annotated on virtually every page. You must have read it many times. In the late 1880s and the early 1890s, his cemetery work is begun. In 1893, he visited the Columbia Exposition in Chicago. Shortly thereafter, he moved to Lincoln, Nebraska. In 1893, and you can see the entry here, my last night home. I'll read what he wrote. It's too hard to read this, but I have translated it prior. From his 1893 diary, Sunday, October 15th, my last night home. This is my last night home for a while. I hope not for the last. I left a key to my room home here with Mary today to keep in case anything happens to me. The next day, he took a train to Nebraska. By November 6th, he was in Lincoln, where he spent the rest of his life. In Lincoln, he worked as a general handyman, doing odd jobs, carpentry, roofing, mowing lawns. The last few decades of his life, his home became known as a place where University of Nebraska students could go for a meal, conversation, even an occasional loan. He himself once wrote, he even roomed and boarded students cheap to help through college. When he was ill in 1933, a sign hung out front. And I'm quoting from a 1933 newspaper article about this event. quaky white chalk letters, jagged like strokes of a chart, on a black slate hanging beside the splintery front door of 1220 Vine Street, whisper, "Roy is sick, come in." 100 men in all parts of the world are sorry. The honest earnings of a 75-year-old man have gone to help young men fearful of dropping school because finances were low. His home in Lincoln was like a museum, with every room filled with its various collections. He had collections of lighting devices of various eras, silver and pewter, old and rare books, crockery and dishes, fireplace articles, quilts. In 1900, George, Simeon, and Joseph sold their shares of their father's farm in Frieden to their brother William for $1,000 each. Thanks to Dick Stevens for that deed information. He wrote a multi-page list of things he gave away or people and organizations he supported. As he wrote in the third person, Roy gave many things. However, he drew the line on giving to anyone who smoked or chewed. A partial list from that multi-page list. He supported a native worker, Mr. Nonsan, in Siam, 1 year, 1920. He gave away hundreds of Christmas cards and remembrances. He sent many letters of sympathy to those in sorrow and bereavement. He gave clothing to the poor and such. He paid salary to Yellow Frame Church and Lincoln Presbyterian as long as he was able. He gave books and such to the Salvation Army and helped as he could. He attended hundreds of funerals. He made a business of greeting the strangers at church with a good warm handshake. In 1935, he made his last donation to the Historical Society, which included his cemetery maps and notebooks. He died in Lincoln on January 10th, 1936, at the age of 77. He is buried in the Roy family plot in the Yellow Frame Church Cemetery.
Before I start, I just want to point out a couple of things. You might have noticed that we're all wearing white gloves, the three of us that are touching things. There are certain materials that don't like human touch. Okay, we have chemicals in our hands and they actually will eat away at certain materials. Cloth is definitely one of them and paper is the other. Then there are some things that actually like us to touch them. Wood does. Wood likes us to touch it. If I didn't have my gloves on, okay, wood likes our touch. We have oil in our hand too, and the oils in our hand, the wood likes. What likes our touch even more is leather. The more you touch leather, the softer it will be. If you leave leather sit, it will dry out and fall apart. Okay, so it all depends on what the old material is. Now, George Roy, he mentioned, okay, became interested in art, drawing, penmanship, painting, and flowers at an early age. He actually studied in 1876, he was only 18, okay, he studied with a Professor Dietrich of New York City. Now, I've tried every which way to find this man. I have not found him. There are Dietrichs on the internet, mostly over in Europe. So it could be that he was from the same kind of family, but they were artists. But I couldn't trace a Dietrich here, and when we don't have the first name, it really gets even tougher. The one that I thought I had a hold on, he never came to America. So I said, well, that's not him. But it could be that it was his son, a cousin or something. There could be a connection somewhere. But anyway, this Professor Dietrich was from New York City, and he came out to the home of Anne Shotwell. Now, we haven't figured out where her house is either.
No.
No.
Probably Frieden.
Probably Frieden. But Roy studied with this Professor Dietrich with Anne Shotwell, and interesting fact, Anne Shotwell ended up becoming his sister-in-law. She married William, his brother William, who was the one that inherited the farm. So at that time, he started to get more into details and learn the actual art of drawing and sketching. And Jeffrey will be telling you more about that. I'm just going to focus on the textile part. He made a bunch of sketches of his work. Of course, everything had sketches. He actually entitled this whole little thing that he wrote called Fancy Work by Myself. And within that, he described 17 different textile type products that he had made. We have 4 of them, and some of them are very important for. The first ones I want to talk about, maybe if you could help me, Hank? We're going to hold up the lambiquin. The first thing I want to talk about is the lambiquin. Now, I made a little poster to try and help you understand a little bit better. Maybe you'll take that piece. I'll take this piece. A lambiquin, okay, is a short ornamental drapery or cornice. You find it across tops of windows, doorways, 4-poster beds, shelf edges. I even found where they actually put it on a piece of wood, that round thing in the middle there. That's actually a table. And they actually put a lambiquin all the way around that table. Now I tried, it took me like 3 or 4 shots, but I managed to finally draw and copy his sketch. That's his sketch down at the bottom. I copied it as best I could to show you the lambiquin. We only have 2 pieces of it. So what we have are, looking at that sketch, piece 2 and 3. And so it would be like this, and there would be a longer one where Hank is, all right, and then this would be repeated where I am. Okay, so it's actually 5 pieces all told. We own these 2. Okay. Now, basically, what this one particularly is this one's a wild rose, and I thought perhaps that was a goldfinch, but he says it's a canary. So I guess he had a pet canary, because a lot of his paintings of the flowers are the wildflowers in the area. I mean, I happen to live in Frieden, so I kind of know the wildflowers, and some of them aren't though. So he must have also, I guess he had some of his own, but he must have also painted some from photographs, because there's just too many different ones to have that many different ones. But anyway, this is a wild rose. He did a beautiful job with this, and there's daisies on that one. Maybe we can just.
Is that silk or satin?
There's satin up top, okay, and then this is velvet.
And that's painted?
It's painted right on it. Yeah, it's painted right on it. And these 2 pieces are in really good shape. And then the little tassels, of course, are hanging there too. And that was typical of a lambiquin. There were tassels all over the place. And what I didn't know before I researched this was that there also was a protective cloth worn over the helmet in medieval times. It took me a while to find an actual picture that would print out for you, but they actually had fancy cloths over their helmets, and that I did not know that, and I certainly didn't know it was called a lambiquin. I only knew the other part, the more textile part that we have. As far as dates on these, let me just tell you the date on it. He made the lambiquin in 1886. And it was donated by a Grace Van Horn. We don't really know who that is either. The 1 and 2, the big long ones on the ends, they must have been beautiful because they were large white cranes, cattails, and palms. The rest of the stuff was all daisies and wild roses, the same stuff that's there. So, but the 2 end pieces must have been quite lovely. The next one I want to talk about is a silk banner. I'll let Hank, you want to hold this one up? Okay, this one's interesting because this one is silk, and the silk is deteriorating a lot. So before it was even given to us, someone had already sewn the stabilizing fabric on it, which is helping hold it together. And this one was made in 1887. Again, we have a wild rose, only this time we have a moth flying around. Apparently this was one of a pair, according to his notes, and the other one had a painting of morning glories on it. And this one was part of the Saddleberg collection, which is a very large collection. I'm sure Jeffrey will mention that later. Okay, we'll just lay that one back down too. Now, if you can you hold up this one? See if we can get this one up in the air. This is called a velvet crazy quilt. The whole thing is velvet, but there's all different kinds of velvet here. And a crazy quilt generally means that there's lots of different fabrics and they're cut in oddball shapes. And of course that means they're all hand sewn together. Now some crazy quilts go even one step further. If you're tired, Hank, you can put it down whenever you want to put it down because that gets hard. At the DAR Museum up in Wantage, we have a crazy quilt that goes one step further. Not only is it all different fabrics and all different shapes, they actually put a hand stitching on every one of the connections, and all these little hand stitches are different embroidery stitches. So it went even one step further than just the different pieces. The middle of this one, and it's still velvet, everything is velvet, is hand painted, and again you've got the daisies. It's the same typical daisies that are on there. Now, and he made this one in 1895. Now, I think the best thing is we're going to flop this over to here. One more time. And then we're just going to pick the whole thing up and move it to that end. Yeah. Okay. By the way, he has his name on the back of all of these too. Everything says George W. Roy. They all say Frieden, New Jersey. So he was very much into it. This is kind of the pride and joy one. This is the really special one. This is a satin bed quilt. And some pieces, yes, it's all satin. And the satin basically is a term for how the fabric was constructed. Okay, when fabric is constructed, well, it's too hard to show on a loom today. But when fabric is constructed, when it's called satin, it's a satin weave rather than the fiber itself. The fiber is silk. It's the way the cloth is made that is satin. And what they do is they raise up all of the threads and everything else is underneath. So underneath satin, the back side of satin is very rough. And all these extra pieces come up to the top, almost like a floating kind of situation, which unfortunately creates a very weak fabric. And you see that on some of the places, you will see it. Combine that with the fact that silk, being a natural fiber, is also, even though it's a strong fiber to pull on kind of thing, it's a weak fiber and then it breaks down because it's natural. All your natural fibers will break down, and silk happens to be the one that will break down the easiest. And again, these were all used. So people touching it, so the pieces that are probably most worn are on the edges because they moved it. You know, they picked it up and they put it on the bed or took it off and whatever, and they didn't put gloves on. So you'll notice, excuse me, that the ones that are fraying like this one, okay, are pretty much all the ones on the edges. There's 49 squares here. There are no two colors alike. Each one is painted in oil with pictures of flowers, crosses, lots of crosses, moths, and then the middle has two little farm pictures on it, actual scenes. You can see them later when you come up. One of them has a scene, and one of them has, I think it's sheep, right? Yes, sheep. So one of them has little sheep grazing in it. And again, he has the whole thing set. It says this satin bed quilt was painted in oil by George W. Roy, Frieden, Sussex County, New Jersey in 1885. So he paints on everything. And it's on the back somewhere too. And it has a beautiful lace edging. He painted it in 1885, like I said. The thing about this one is this one first place, okay, but they called it first premium, all right, at the Sussex County Fair that was held in September of 1885. Because originally the Sussex County Fair was held in Newton. It lasted only a couple years, discontinued. Then they started up again in 1856. It discontinued again in 1864 because of the Civil War. Started up again in 1880 in a different place in Newton. The second time, or that time in 1880, it went where Memory Park is. Okay? Include a half-mile track, which Jeffrey has driven. And what street is that now?
Franklin, maybe?
Franklin Avenue, I believe. We have one picture of it downstairs in Sug's room. You'll see a picture of the horse is pulling a cart. I don't know those kind of terms, but anyway, it's on the racetrack, and you'll see it down there. It didn't move to Branchville until 1926, and then it moved to Plains Road, where it is now, in 1976. So the fair moved a lot, but this one was his pride and joy. This was the one that won first place in 1885. Okay. And that's pretty. Now, one other interesting thing, we don't have it, okay, but an interesting thing that Jeffrey found in the notes, because talking about Yellow Frame Church, when they did that dedication, when he took those pictures and they brought all those flowers, that wagon load of flowers, apparently he also made 2 white silk banners. One hung on either side of the windows right behind the pulpit. And the banners, he talked about Mr. Townley. Mr. Townley printed those 2 pictures that he showed you. He printed them on those silk banners. So they must have been absolutely beautiful. So, but we don't have those, unfortunately. Okay, that's pretty much it for textiles. Now, let's skip this.
We'll talk a little bit about his paintings and drawings. Referring to himself in the third person again, George writes, Roy early took to art, drawing, penmanship, and painting in flowers. As we learned from Wendy, George first studied oil painting at the age of 18 at the home of Annie Shotwell, his future sister-in-law. He wrote about this experience also in the third person. He painted 4 pictures, 14-inch by 22-inch. The Juniata, Itasca Lake, Mount Tamrath, and Lake George. Our painting is Lake George. It's signed and dated 1876. The other painting is one of Annie Shotwell's. It is signed but not dated. Why do we think this came from that same workshop? Well, if you examine the back of the paintings, the stretchers and the canvas are identical. So there's a very good chance that the professor brought stretch canvas out with him so that his students would not have to be searching around for it. This is the only painting that we have that George did that is not just flowers. Everything else after this is flowers, and more flowers, and more flowers. Whether it's on textiles, bottles, a rock, cardboard, tollware. Whoops. So he liked the flowers. In the 1880s, when he was in his 20s, most of these paintings and drawings and textiles are made in the 1880s. 2 of his earliest ones are these 2 small frame paintings from 1883, oil painted on black cardboard. Tollware was popular at that time. This is he calls it a teapot that belonged to his grandmother, Mrs. Charles Hankinson. He painted it for her. The 2 candle holders with the beautiful little flowers on them, these he painted for his mother, Mrs. Charles Roy. Oh, how do we know this? As I said, George writes on everything. On the rock. And he dated everyone too, so now we know the dates. Bottles. These 2 bottles are identical. One is pink flowers, the other is blue flowers. Botanists could probably tell us what they are, but I'm not sure. But again, you can see his complete description on the bottom. This one I thought was a little bit interesting, since it's a wine bottle. Where did he get a wine bottle? Charles Roy set this bottle full of sweet Catawba wine, Charles Roy being his father. Came from the Pleasant Valley wine cellar in Reims, New York. Painted in 1888. This plate was painted for his cousins, Mr. and Mrs. Charles W. Snook, for their wedding day. Other than the painting that he did at the workshop, everything was flowers. We're going to do these drawings now, Hank, so I think what we'll do is push these back a little bit. Let me just get these. Yeah, push the black ones back. That's it. And then we can move these over a little bit.
I can roll this once.
Yeah, put it in front there, Hank. That's it. Okay, you want to get
You get it in there?
your first set of drawings, Hank? There should be another one, Hank. It's here, it is. Okay. A few years ago, we rediscovered a box of 65 pen and ink drawings buried in a box in the back corner. They were very dirty, as you can see. As I show you some of them, there are some that I have cleaned, but it's a very long process, but you'll see the difference. These pen and ink drawings, most of them are on 12.5 by 15-inch Bristol board. And I mention that because he was very proud of the fact that he used Bristol board. Bristol board has a higher rag content, therefore it's a better, longer lasting board. But he was very proud of that. Many times he wrote on Bristol board. They are based on the Spencerian system of handwriting. The Spencerian script was popular in the 1850s to the 1920s. It became integrated into the school system and was taught throughout the United States. There are two examples of the Spencerian script that you see almost every day. The original Ford logo from 1906 and the Coca-Cola logo from 1888. These are examples of Spencerian script. So how did he learn Spencerian script? Well, that's easy. We recently had donated a book of learning how to use Spencerian script. That was his brother's. Obviously, he looked over his brother's shoulder, and if you remember the rote books you may have done in your elementary school years, that's basically what this is. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So this was Williams. He did it, and obviously George copied it from him. So, what did he do with all of these drawings? What kind of drawings are there? Well, there's a few, and I've tried to show you groups of the different types. He did a whole bunch of alphabets. I don't know why. He did alphabets, colors and pen and ink. These are all pen and ink. This is not pencil. So once that line is on the paper, it's on the paper. And I've found virtually no mistakes. So I don't know if he went through a lot of paper or he was just a very careful worker. He did a lot of birds. He did a lot of scroll work, which is a direct takeoff from the Spencerian handmanship. Of those 65 pen and ink drawings, 10 of them won prizes at the Sussex County Fair. So, now, we're gonna look at the rest of them. So, this one is entitled Shaded Block Italic. Lettering with pen. Rustic alphabet. Side block alphabet. You can see particularly how dirty are this one. Okay, Hank, the next four. This one. These, okay, put these in the back, the animals in the back. That's it. That's it. So you can see he used some white Bristol board and some off-white Bristol board. Here he's using a sepia ink, brownish color. You can see the scroll work, the birds, the woman. He also did a lot of things with poems. He would illustrate poems. He did birds, birds on a nest, birds with babies, lots of birds. Okay, Hank? And my favorite series are his animals. He did a horse, an eagle, a deer, a lion. I'll use the deer as an example. You can see where I cleaned this corner and where it's not cleaned. This is all done very carefully with a gum eraser. That has been cleaned, and this has been cleaned. In 1893, he moved to Nebraska. There's an art gap for 30 years. We have nothing from that time. In the late 1920s and 1930s, when he was in his early 70s, we find a group of pen and ink drawings with a very different look when compared to the Spencerian drawings that we've been looking at. The ones I'm going to show you, they are architectural drawings utilizing perspective and a vanishing point to make them look three-dimensional. We've gathered the original drawings together here. I will be passing around copies of some of these later, but I just wanted you to see some of the original ones and the type of things that he was doing. I think he drew every house that his family ever owned in Frieden and elsewhere. Now I'll pass around some copies so you can read them. Okay. You've already seen the Frieden School. And we can tell it was Townley that gave him the idea. He probably paid Townley to make a photograph so he could draw it. These are albumin prints, which is why they're faded. So I'm going to start it here. If you could just zigzag it to the back, and wherever it ends on the back, hold on to them till the end. Again, these are copies, so they're not super fragile. He did quite a few schools. He did the Yellow Frame Academy in school. Oh, look, a Townley. The interesting thing about this on the back, for those of you who are not real familiar with the layout of Yellow Frame Church today, he drew a map. Here's Route 94. There's the original church, 1786. The second church, 1887. The academy, which is this. And in front of that was called the Green. That has since become part of the cemetery. You can see the parsonage here as well. So, Yellow Frame Academy and School. I'm sure you history buffs will recognize this. It's Sussex County's first courthouse. How did you know what it looked like? Since it had a fire in 1847, he wasn't born until 1858. Well, in his library was this book, which is Barber and Howe, Historical Collections of the State of New Jersey, originally published in 1844. This edition is from 1845. The fire again was 1847. If you ever find a copy of this book, it's very handy. It has a lot of old drawings of almost every town in Sussex County and the other counties. Barber and Howe. So, it was quite a beautiful building. Yeah. It looks very different today, of course. On the back, everybody recognizes what
High
George
Point.
calls High Point Tower. High Point Tower. And I think it's interesting, you see these funny lines on this one. About that he wrote, "The tower, as will look at night when light up the rays of light." So these, I guess, were spotlights. I don't know. Someone maybe knows if they have spotlights today. I don't know. High Point Tower and the first courthouse. He did a map of Sussex County and New Jersey in colored pencil that shows the east-west Jersey Lawrence line running through the state and the Lawrence line running through Sussex County. This one is titled Home Sweet Home. This was the Roy family farm in Frieden. The farmhouse still exists. It's been changed a lot, but it's still there. If you're heading south on 94 in Frieden, on the right-hand side, you'll see what looks like this part of the house you can easily identify. Across the road is a horse farm, Bright Star, something like that. But anyway, it's still there. It was built sometime before 1850. I think it's funny, writing about this, George wrote, if you look at this window, there's a little blue penciled X beside it. That was George's bedroom. And on the back is the family barn. Why is it 3 different drawings? Well, he's showing us how it developed and grew. And even in 1868, when his father built this barn, the whole barn was moved where this was, and they added a basement. So this is the original barn, the middle barn, and then the last barn. Those buildings I don't think are there anymore. As I said, he did a lot of houses, and I picked these two because they're sort of related. This one is Joseph Hankinson, who was one of his great-grandfathers, and John Anderson, who was another great-grandfather. And on the John Anderson drawing, he wrote, "Foot of the Anderson Hill, North Frieden." Now, I don't know if that's the same Anderson Hill where Myra lived, but I'm sure somebody would know that. So these are 2 of his great-grandfathers, and they are drawn from memory. He mentions that a couple places, so don't know how accurate they are. But anybody recognize this map? Newton. Newton before 1812, apparently. This was a photograph that George had Townley print for him, of course. And I'm going to read the back of it because it describes what we're looking at here. This is a photograph that was taken of a hand-drawn map. So on the back it says, from the Sussex Register, June 24th, 1896. Now before I read what I was going to read, I think it's interesting, it was in the Register by June 24th, 1896. And by July 9th, George Roy had a copy of it in Nebraska. How's that work? Was he call up on the phone and say, "Hey, AC, I need," I don't know, but this is 1896. I assume they had telephones. I don't know. I haven't studied the telephone system. But anyway, so what it says on the back is it says, Martin E. Huff has secured a photo of the ancient map of Newton, which he obtained from the Mrs. Anderson. And it is an interesting relic, especially to those who have any recollection of old buildings. Its age is unknown, but it must have been made prior to 1812, as buildings then known to exist do not appear. At that time, only 40 buildings were noted on the map, chief of which were the courthouse, the Presbyterian Church, and the county hotel. It is a bird's eye view drawn in colored ink and a faithful reproduction of the old landmarks. If the dwellings were numbered and the names of the occupants at the date of the earliest recollection given therewith, the map would have present and much future value. Townley has extra copies for sale. Anybody ever see a copy? Yes, so anyway, I'm going to show you the original because frankly, this is a copy that Bill Straight made for us. And the copy is actually better than the original, but I'll show you the original. So also the original is much smaller. George kept Townley very busy. Oh, and Wendy described the things that were made for the church. You know, photography, when it was invented, was nothing more than painting and light-sensitive emulsion on different strata, different materials. So they very quickly learned that certain fabrics, you might have to size it a little bit beforehand, but you could paint a light-sensitive emulsion on a fabric, put a negative on it, expose it to the sun, and make a photograph. So when I first started studying photography, I thought, oh, that must be a fairly recent thing, but no. Liquid emulsion has been around since the beginning of photography. That's daguerreotypes were liquid emulsion. And that, I believe, is the end of mine. Oh, no, I did forget. Some things to look at on the Newton map. Too late for you, sorry. This is Newton Green here. If you'll notice, there are 3 well heads that are drawn. You know, the old kind with you wind up the bucket and bring it up out of the well. Well, there's 3 of them on the Newton Green. The other interesting thing is this is the Academy building as it first looked. You notice the door is on the other side, now the door is in the middle. That was done in probably the 1840s, 1830s. But if you look closely, particularly on the drawing, the copy, there is a steeple on the north end of the Academy. It's right on the fold of the original map, but if you look with a loop, you can see at the top, there's either a weather vane or a pennant. And it, again, the steeple. When we were getting prepared to get a new roof on the Academy, for those of you who don't know, if we're lucky, the new roof work will start in a couple of months. We had to open up the attic in the Academy. We have 3 roofs there because the building was built at 3 different times. But the old original part of the Academy, there was no access to the attic. Well, we needed the contractor to be able to look and see what the underside of the roof looked like. And what we found on the north end of the building, which is that side, at that end, there's some kind of wooden scaffolding. We're not sure yet because no one's really climbed up there and walked all the way down to the end to look. But it looks to be some type of support probably for a steeple. We'll know more of that when the roofers start their work. And now it's Wendy's turn.
Okay. At one time, George Roy was considered to be the leading historian of all that was once known as Hardwick Township. Now it's Yellowframe, Frieden, Stillwater, and Johnsonburg. He spelled Johnsonburg really funky too. Anyway, and also Newton Township. So that's the area that he focused on. He knew Yellowframe Cemetery by heart. If someone asked him where so-and-so was buried, he would tell them exactly where they were buried. So that was his big one, obviously, Yellowframe. He first started out, we think, by drawing sketchbooks. Now, the sketchbooks are in very poor condition. So, what we have done, actually what Matt and Gina did, no, not Gina, I don't remember her name. Gina was the one that came this summer. What was it? Brianna. Brianna, whoops. And Matthew helped us out here. These notebooks are so fragile that every time we opened them up, they would start to disintegrate on us. They were just like falling apart. So what has happened is they're all in archival sleeves, in archival boxes. And they're all numbered. The pages are numbered. And so that we can put them back after we take them out and do something like this. And I'm just gonna put up a few, just to show you some of the different things he did. Since he was artistic, he actually drew a lot of the carvings that were on the stones. Now these things are absolutely invaluable to us. I don't know how many times I would say, thank God for George Roy. Because in doing all the research that I've done in that cemetery, finding all the veterans, marking their graves, and then doing other research to do the tours and so forth, without things like these notebooks, we'd be lost. The notebooks and the map. Now that's a copy of the old Newton Cemetery. The original's down in the safe. We don't even mess with it at all, okay, because it's that important to us. But that's the map, and then these are some of the sketch pages from this particular book. I'll show you some of the other ones too in a few minutes, but I'm just going to show a few from each one. So he had each one kind of labeled. It says Old Newton Cemetery. It says Newton, Old Cemetery and Colored Graveyard, which is our black cemetery. He mentioned Houston, Andover, Ryerson, Vaughan, Gouston. Now, some of these have nothing in them. There's virtually nothing in them. I typed up a list of ones that actually have something written. I read off 20. I don't know how many people are really here. If we need more, I'll have to run more. But in any case, I tried to make a list of all the maps that we have and all of the notebooks that he did that actually have entries. Some of them have, more than others. He did a lot with Newton. He did a lot with Stillwater. He did a lot with Yellow Frame. The other ones are a little sketchy. They aren't as many entries in them. Now, what he did was, besides, they're in alphabetical order, kind of. Like he has A, and then the ones that are A's are under there, but that's not alphabetical. So you have to kind of look through them to find who you're looking for. But he even would draw what something looked like. Like this one here, this is a drawing of Daniel Stewart's box tomb. Daniel Stewart is the gentleman up there. Oh gosh, there's a big glare on him, but he's the first picture up there. Daniel Stewart was one of the original trustees of the Newton Academy. He gave land to the cemetery. He was an important man. He was in the mercantile business. He was very important in this town. And he and his wife are both buried there. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like this now. It's flat. This was the kind that had fancy columns holding them up. We found pieces of the columns, but we don't have enough pieces to put it back up, at least not properly. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with that, but he shows what it should have looked like. On this one, this particular one, is a beautiful sketch of what the top of that stone once looked like. It had a weeping willow and an urn. Yeah, the top of that stone doesn't exist anymore. Okay, but without these pictures, we wouldn't have known that they even were there. This one mentions its memory of Matthew Davis. Now, when I first came here in 16 actually, and started working on the veterans across the street, I was told that Matthew Davis was the oldest veteran buried in that cemetery, and he never had a stone. Well, it was Jeffrey who discovered these downstairs in the basement. And I'm looking through these, so in the meantime, I do all this paperwork, and I go to the VA, and I had to get Gottheimer to give me a letter, and I have a brand new stone over there for him, and it's the first one I dedicated in like 2017. Well, he had a stone, and he had a stone that has the picture of the person with the flying, with the wings, meaning that they're ascending to heaven. Now, sometimes the center is not a human kind of face, sometimes a cherub, okay? Sometimes it's a skeleton. So the skeleton apparently is not knowing what direction they're going, where the cherub is going up and the person is going up. So thankfully, Matthew Davis was going up. I don't know if we're ever going to find his stone, but we'll give it a shot, you know. But I was really surprised to find that we actually had that one. I didn't know we even had it. Now, what I wanted to read to you is the other thing that he helps us with, besides all these pictures and sketches that he did, okay, was that he also tells us a lot of the epitaphs that we can't read anymore. And I'm sure some of you know that when I'm over in the cemetery doing a tour, I portray Letitia Anderson. Well, her husband was Thomas Anderson, and he was very important to this town too. And this is his, and he has an urn on top. Now, an urn stands for the ashes. The ashes it stands for death, meaning the ashes are in the urn. But what's cool about it is he put the whole epitaph there. And this is what it really says. Sure, the last end of the good man in peace, how calm his exit. Night dews fall not more gently to the ground, nor weary worn-out winds expire so softly. Lo, where this silent marble weeps, a husband and a father sleeps, a heart within whose sacred call the peaceful virtues love to dwell, affection warm and faithful sincere, a soft and humanity were there. So obviously he was well liked, and it's a very sweet kind of an epitaph. Well, then I didn't bother putting the picture of that one up, of this one up, because it doesn't have a picture on it. But then you have William Saussman, okay? And I read this one at the last tour, and I said, you know what? I'm going to show you what some of the nice ones are and some of the not so nice ones are. This one says, as you are now, so once was I, in health and strength, though here I lie. As I am now, so you must be, prepared for death and follow me. So some of them weren't so nice. By the way, Thomas Anderson lived to the age of 62, and he died in 1805. William Saussman died in 1802. He was only 31. Wow. So that not so nice one, he didn't live too long either. Yeah. Rather than try to fiddle with those anymore, I'm just going to hold a couple more up, I think. Be the easy thing. Now, Stillwater, I said he did a lot in Stillwater. Let me just show you a couple here and explain what some of these are. Okay, this one is from Stillwater, and you're going to see the hands. Hands were a big part of epitaphs and gravestones. The ones where the hand is pointing up, the finger's pointing up, okay, that person's going up to heaven as God is waiting for them. All right? Apparently there are ones where it's down. Oh my goodness. And God is reaching out to grab them, is what the directions or what the interpretations tell me. I haven't found any of those, thank God. Now, look at the hands that are joining. Those joining, that's a husband and wife. Because on the one hand, you will see, okay, ruffles on her wrist, and the other one was more like a shirt jacket. So it's a man and a woman, so they're married, and they're joining for eternity. And what I only found out today was whoever's hand is grasping the other, that one died first. So in this case, the husband died first. And they both have that grasping, and that's something I didn't know till today. So that's what's the hands. There's also praying hands. There's also, what's the other one? There were 3 kinds of hands. Sorry. I don't remember the other one off my hand. Okay, what was the other hand? Where did I leave my notes on the hands? Gloves are nice, but they're hard to work with. Nope, that's the winged one. I already talked about that one. I lost my hand. Well, in any case, hands can do lots of different things. And I'm sure, you know, there's the clasping. I told you about that. Well, I lost my hand thing. Anyway, there were 4 things. Here it is. Okay, clasping, pointing, praying, or blessing. Now, I'm not sure what the difference between blessing and praying is. I really don't know what those hands are gonna quite look like, but that's the 4 things that are supposed to be there. Now, another thing we have are the lambs. Now, the lambs are a symbol of Christ, and they're a symbol of innocence, and so they're usually on children's stones. We had one over here. It doesn't have a head. So we did have one in the Newton Cemetery, but its head's no longer there. But this one is, and of course there's 2 heads, there's 2 lambs there, and then here's another pointing up one. Here's the other one I wanted to show you. Nope. Oh, the weeping willow. Okay, the weeping willow, now, my father always told me that weeping willows were bad luck. He never wanted one on his land. He said they were bad luck. And yet, when I talk about them, they mention that they stand for eternal grief, signifies sadness, grief. It also stands for immortality, but that would be good luck, not bad luck. Oops, wrong side. Yes, no, I got it. And it's supposed to be very popular in the Victorian area. We have a few over here, but it's supposed to be like perpetual mourning. Now the book one, here's my book here. There's a nice book one here, and if I look at this one more closely, there's actual writing on it. So this is more like a Bible rather than a book. The books can be for a scholar, for a student, or in some cases they're a Bible. And because of what's written on this one, which seems to be Jeremiah, oh, house of, looks like thus saint. Anyway, it's definitely from the Bible, so that's a Bible. Now the other thing that's got around it is the oak leaf. And something interesting I was talking to Judy Smith about, according to this list of moral interpretations, they say the oak leaf represents strength, but they talk about it being the wood that the cross was made out of for Jesus Christ. I grew up going to Sunday school, and I was always taught that the dogwood was what the Christ cross was made out of, that his cross was made out of a dogwood tree, which at one time was a very strong and tall tree, but then once it was used as a cross for Jesus Christ, the tree no longer grew strong. It grew short and turned. And there was always a story about the blossoms being 4 petals, and having the brown in the middle for the blood stains, and then the crown of thorns right in the middle. There's a yellow center, a yellow pointed center to a dogwood blossom. So she's going to check with someone to find out what's going on, like why, because she said the same thing. We always grew up with dogwood, but this particular thing says that it's the oak leaf is for strength because of that particular wood. So I don't know what's going on there, but anyway. Those are some of the different interpretations in any case. So all of these notebooks, like I said, have been put, these are archival sleeves, all acid-free sleeves, so now we can pick them up and use them, and they're all in archival boxes. So we trying to convert a lot of the stuff in this museum over to be able to keep them for longer times. The maps, some are original, some are copies. This isn't original. They're tough because they're rolled and they don't stay open. But you want to grab one end of that for me? But you can see it's similar, very similar to the old Newton Cemetery, where they're all marked, and on the bottom is the key. And George Roy's handwriting is not the easiest to read. But that's what he does. And with Stillwater, there's the old section, which is by Hank, and then, of course, the new section with all that roadway that's all through Stillwater. But the original section is all over there, so all the Revolutionary guys are over there. So I'm getting to know that area quite well. I'll give this to you. Okay. So the maps are all rolled up. I'm not sure how we're going to store them better so they don't, we can unroll them. But like I said, this is a copy. So this one we use a lot for lots of different things, even when we're, Jeffrey uses it when he's over in the cemetery too. But all the names are there, and you're going to see some that are blank. And you're going to see that same thing in the notebooks, that there's blanks. He couldn't read them. So he couldn't read them, he just drew a line. And I don't know how they did it, but the Applemans in the 80s interpreted all of this. And they went over and they photographed all the stones that were there. Now you got a big difference here. George Roy did a lot of this in the late 1800s. He started this, if you wanted for Newton, in the late 1800s. You'll see a date up on top, okay, of 1891. He didn't finish it till 1900. He started in I can do this. He started in 1891. He finished it in 1905. Okay, and still these other maps have all very similar dates on them. So he must have done these first. He did all these sketchbooks first, and then he did some of the maps. But you'll see on the list that I gave you, he didn't do maps of all of them. But the Appleman somehow patiently interpreted all of his handwriting. So for us, it's really great because he numbered all the graves. And the Applemans, we have a 6-volume set of binders with all of them in it. So we can find a number on here and go look up and find out who's buried there, or vice versa. We can find the stone somewhere over there. We look at the map, find the number, and then look that up that way and find out who was buried there. So we use this a lot. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for me. Jeffrey's gonna finish and answer your questions.
Was there a Civil War general buried across the street there?
So, general, I don't have a general. I have 22 Civil War guys, but none of them are generals, no.
Take more questions in a minute. So, was he a Renaissance man? Well, what is a Renaissance man? It was an ideal that was developed in Renaissance Italy. It was expressed most succinctly by Leon Battista Alberti, who wrote about the Renaissance ideal. You can do all things if you will. Alberti was an architect, a painter, a classicist, a poet, a scientist, a mathematician. The Renaissance ideal is the idea that men and women should embrace all knowledge to fulfill their potential. So, what has George left us? And by that, I mean, what has he left to the Historical Society? Just going to go over and review the things that we've showed you tonight. His 28 diaries, his cemetery notebooks and maps, his quilts and other textiles, his drawings in the Spencerian style, and his architectural drawings of Sussex County family homes and landmarks. Excuse me. His many paintings on canvas, textile, bottles, tin, and yes, a rock. His many drawings of the layout of Freedom. A collection of glass lantern slides of Sussex County scenes. 2 years ago here, we had a program showing those lantern slides on an old lantern slide projector. Don't forget his 3 large written works. His History of Yellow Frame Church, over 500 pages. His History of Freedom, over 400 pages. His Roy Genealogy, 800 pages. In addition to that, for all of those 3 volumes, he has voluminous notes where he went over things again and again and again. So you can decide, was he a Renaissance man? Now, do you have any questions for Wendy or myself? Now